Hello.
It was supposed to be one of those lazy Saturdays that fade into memory without leaving any mark. The house felt still, almost suspended in the long stretch of afternoon. Dusty sunlight streamed through the blinds in the living room, cutting golden lines across the floor. Outside, the neighborhood moved at its own rhythm. Distant voices from kids riding bikes, the occasional bark of a dog, the faint thrum of a lawn mower 2 houses down. Inside, I had the place mostly to myself. My mom was away, visiting her sister for the weekend, and she had left me in charge of keeping things together. The fridge was stocked, the laundry basket was full, and I had promised her I would take care of both. It felt simple, almost too simple, like the kind of day where nothing unexpected could possibly happen. That was before the knock on the door. When I opened it, I found my mom's friend standing there. She was one of those figures who had drifted in and out of my life for years, always orbiting close because of her bond with my mother. I remembered her at birthday parties when I was younger, remembered the sound of her laugh, remembered the way she sometimes showed up with small gifts, cookies, a plant, a book she thought we might like. She was part of the backdrop of my childhood, someone I never questioned being there. She smiled as though she already belonged inside. "Your mom told me she'd be out of town. I thought I'd stop by, check if you needed anything." I stepped aside to let her in, and soon enough her bag rested on the counter in the kitchen. She looked around, as though measuring the emptiness of the house without my mom's presence. Something softened in her eyes, and then she glanced at me. "Actually," she said slowly, "I could use a favor. Downstairs, in the laundry room." I nodded without hesitation. It didn't seem strange. She often helped with things around the house. Besides, the basement laundry had always been tricky, the machines stubborn and noisy. I followed her down the wooden steps, each one creaking under our weight. The air grew cooler, the faint smell of detergent mixing with the sharper scent of metal and damp concrete. The laundry room hadn't changed much since I was a kid. White tile stretched across the floor, some squares chipped at the corners. The washer and dryer stood side by side like tired sentinels, their surfaces scratched from years of use. Shelves above them held bottles of detergent, bleach, fabric softener, all neatly arranged. A wicker basket filled with towels rested on a folding table, and in the corner a mop leaned against the wall. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting the room in its pale, unforgiving glow. She gestured toward the washer. "It's been acting up. Your mom mentioned it to me the other week. Sometimes it stops mid-cycle. Thought maybe you could take a look." I crouched, turning the knob back and forth, pressing the buttons like I might discover some hidden trick. The machine whirred faintly but seemed fine for the moment. I wasn't an expert, but fiddling with it gave me an excuse to avoid the silence that suddenly stretched between us. When I looked back over my shoulder, I noticed she wasn't watching the washer at all. Her eyes lingered on me instead, thoughtful, unreadable. I stood up, brushing imaginary dust from my hands. "Looks okay. Maybe it just needs to run empty once or twice." She nodded, but there was a distance in her expression, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. Then, with emotion so fluid it almost escaped my notice, she stepped fully into the room and reached behind her. The door clicked shut. It was such a small sound, barely louder than the hum of the fluorescent light, yet it seemed to shift the very air in the room. I blinked, caught off guard, and for a moment I wondered if I had misheard. But no, the latch was set. The door was closed. "Why'd you—" I began, my voice uncertain. Her reply was soft, almost to herself. "It's better this way." Her gaze didn't waver. The basement felt different now, the low ceiling pressing down, the steady churn of the dryer echoing louder than before. What had been a simple request, help with a machine, suddenly carried a new weight. She leaned against the folding table, arms loosely crossed as if settling in. I tried to focus on the ordinary details around me. The stack of folded towels, the bottle of bleach with its cap half loose, the faint smell of lavender fabric softener clinging to the air. But the longer I stood there, the more those details blurred, eclipsed by the single undeniable fact. The door was locked, and we were alone. It wasn't fear that settled over me, not exactly. It was something harder to define. A tension I couldn't place, an expectation hanging in the silence. The laundry room, once a practical corner of the house, now felt like an entirely different space. A stage. A pause before something neither of us had named. I found myself remembering how different the room had felt when I was younger. Back then the laundry room seemed enormous, a cavern of whirring machines and stacks of folded linens that smelled of soap and comfort. I used to sit on the cold tile floor, watching the spin cycle through the round glass door, hypnotized by clothes tumbling in blurred circles. My mom and her friend would chat nearby, their voices soft and low, words drifting over me like background music. The space had felt safe then, filled with the hum of routine. Now the same room carried another tone entirely. The fluorescent hum, once ignorable, pressed against my ears like a low note that wouldn't end. The air was cool but carried a dampness that clung to my skin. Each object seemed too sharp, too defined. The mop's wooden handle leaning at an angle, the faint rust at the base of the sink's faucet, the curling edge of a detergent box that had been left open. These details screamed of ordinary life, yet standing here, they felt charged, as though they were witnesses to a secret unfolding. She shifted slightly against the folding table, her fingers brushing the wicker basket. The sound of wicker creaking under her touch was oddly loud, snapping against the silence. I realized then that I was holding my breath. I let it out slowly, but it did little to calm the tightness in my chest. The locked door remained behind her, quiet but absolute. It was a simple wooden door, painted white, its brass knob gleaming under the fluorescent light. I had passed through it countless times without a thought, never noticing it more than any other door in the house. Yet now it seemed transformed, as though that small click of the lock had redrawn the boundaries of the world. She tilted her head, eyes still steady. "Don't worry," she murmured, though she didn't explain further. The words did not answer anything, and yet they hung in the air with the same weight as the lock itself. I felt the walls of the room closing in, not physically, but in a way that shifted the space from a corner of a house into something more confined, more deliberate. And as I stood there, my pulse loud in my ears, I realized that whatever had begun in this laundry room was not going to be easily forgotten. The hum of the dryer filled the silence, steady and relentless, as if marking time in a room where time itself had grown uncertain. I leaned back slightly against the washer, unsure of what to do with my hands, unsure of where to look. She hadn't moved since locking the door, her body resting lightly against the folding table, eyes steady, her expression unreadable. "Do you spend much time down here?" she asked finally, her tone casual, though the question felt anything but. "Not really," I admitted. "Just when Mom makes me run the machines." She smiled faintly, as though amused by the image of me hauling laundry. "I used to hate this room when I was your age. It always felt too quiet, like the silence itself was listening." Her words lingered, silence as something alive, something that paid attention. I shifted, glancing around as though I might suddenly see the room differently. The corners darker, the hum of the light harsher, the smell of detergent sharper. And somehow she was right. It did feel as though the silence had taken on its own shape. She crossed her arms, then let them fall again, restless. You know, she continued, I don't think your mom ever realized how many times I helped her down here. I fixed this dryer once, carried baskets up and down the stairs when she was too tired. Little things. No one notices little things. Her voice carried a note I hadn't heard before. Not bitterness, exactly, but something close. A kind of weariness, a desire to be recognized for more than errands and gestures. I didn't know how to answer, so I said the first thing that came to mind. I notice things, I said quietly. Her eyes flicked to me, sharper now, as though testing the weight of my words. Then she gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. Maybe you do. We stood in that narrow room, words slipping in and out of the spaces between us. She began to ask about school, about whether I liked being alone in the house, about what I wanted to do after graduation. They were normal questions, ordinary conversation, and yet the tone made them feel heavier. It wasn't small talk. It was as though each answer mattered in a way I couldn't fully understand. I told her about my classes, about my uncertainty, about how sometimes it felt like I was standing at a crossroads without a map. She listened closely, her arms folded, her head tilted just slightly, the kind of listening that makes you feel as though every word is important. When I stumbled, she didn't fill the silence. She let it stretch, forcing me to find my footing again. I felt the same way once, she admitted. When I was your age, everything felt possible and impossible at the same time. But no one really tells you how heavy choices become once you've made them. The way she said it made me think of years I hadn't lived, of paths taken and not taken, of weight she still carried. Her voice was calm, but it trembled at the edges. The silence stretched again, longer this time. I watched her trace the rim of the wicker basket with her fingertip, slow and deliberate, as though drawing circles she couldn't escape. My pulse beat louder in my ears. She looked at me then, her eyes soft but unflinching. You remind me of someone, she said finally. Who? My voice cracked slightly, betraying my nerves. Her smile was sad, wistful. Someone I knew a long time ago, someone who made me feel alive, like life hadn't already decided everything for me. The words landed with a weight I couldn't name. My throat felt dry. I wanted to ask more, but something in her expression told me the rest of the story wasn't meant to be spoken. Instead, we stood there, the room shrinking smaller with each second. I tried to focus on the familiar details, the detergent bottles, the hum of the machines, but the air between us made them fade. What stayed was her presence, the way her voice still echoed in my head, the way the lock on the door turned the room into a place where silence itself refused to let us go. The laundry room had always been practical, nothing more than a space for chores and utility, but now it felt like an entirely different world. The hum of the dryer became louder, deeper, almost like a heartbeat, steady and relentless, underscoring every pause between us. The fluorescent light flickered faintly, casting a tremor across the tiles, and for a moment I thought it might burn out, leaving us in shadow. The thought unsettled me, but I didn't move. Neither of us did. She leaned a little closer to the folding table, her hand trailing absent-mindedly along the edge as though she needed something solid to anchor her. I caught the subtle tremor in her fingers, a detail that might have been invisible to anyone else. She wasn't as calm as she looked. That realization struck me harder than her words had. "You're quiet," she said softly. Cleared my throat. "I don't know what to say." Her smile was faint, almost invisible. "Then don't. Sometimes silence tells more than words ever could." The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, heavy, humming with unspoken thoughts. My pulse beat against my throat, and I realized how aware I was of every detail. The faint lavender smell of detergent, the squeak of the mop handle as it shifted in the corner, the warmth of the fluorescent bulb radiating faintly from above. Everything ordinary was sharpened, as though the room itself was holding its breath. I glanced at her again, trying to read her expression, but it was impossible. Her eyes held mine for a fraction too long, and in that pause the distance between us seemed to collapse. We weren't aunt and nephew anymore, weren't family friends bound by old familiarity. We were just two people suspended in a moment that defied the roles we were supposed to play. Her hand moved slightly, brushing the wicker basket again, her fingers trailing across the weave as if tracing invisible patterns. Then, in a small shift, she reached for the dryer's door, opened it, then shut it again without pulling anything out. The gesture was meaningless, a stalling motion, but it felt like a message. She didn't want to break the silence with words. She wanted it to stretch, to linger. The dryer clicked as it slowed, the cycle nearing its end, and in that fading hum I felt the room tilt into something unreal. I thought of all the times I had come down here before, carrying loads of laundry with no second thought, no awareness of how walls and air could change with a single locked door. It was disorienting, like waking into a dream where everything looked familiar but nothing behaved the same. She stepped closer, not much, just enough that the air shifted. I could smell her perfume faintly now, mixed with the detergent and the cool damp of the basement. It was subtle, but it wrapped around me, a detail I knew I would remember long after. Neither of us spoke. The silence had become its own language. Every glance, every pause, every shift of weight carried meaning. I felt caught between wanting to step back and wanting to stay frozen in the moment forever. The dryer buzzed, loud and final, signaling the end of its cycle. The sound jolted the air, snapping me out of whatever haze had settled over us. She didn't move right away. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, and for a second I thought she might finally speak the words hanging between us. But she didn't. Instead, she reached out and touched my sleeve, just lightly, fingertips brushing fabric, a gesture that could have been nothing at all, but it wasn't. My breath caught. The contact lasted no more than a second, but it left the air trembling. She withdrew her hand quickly, folding her arms again, as though erasing what had just happened. But the silence that followed was louder than any sound. Time blurred. Minutes passed, though I couldn't measure them. The room was the same. Detergent bottles, tile floor, humming light, but nothing felt the same anymore. The line between ordinary and extraordinary, between expected and forbidden, had blurred completely. We stood in the middle of that fragile space, suspended, waiting for something neither of us dared to name. The next morning came slowly, as if the night had stretched itself into the daylight and refused to end. I woke in my room, the blanket twisted around me, the sound of the birds outside unusually sharp. For a few seconds I thought maybe everything that had happened in the laundry room had been a dream, some trick of exhaustion and imagination. But then I remembered the soft click of the door, the silence that grew too heavy to ignore, the way her hand had brushed my sleeve. Dreams don't leave echoes like tea. I stayed in bed longer than I should have, staring at the ceiling. The house was not empty this morning. I could hear her moving in the kitchen. The scrape of a chair against tile, the hollow knock of a mug placed on the counter, the whistle of the kettle building its low song. They were the ordinary sounds of any morning, but to me they carried weight, reminders that nothing was quite the same anymore. Eventually I forced myself up and walked down the hall. She was at the stove, stirring something in a small pot, sunlight spilling across her shoulders. She looked up when she heard me and smiled the same smile she had given me countless times before. And yet, as soon as our eyes met, I felt the shift again. There was no mention of last night, no trace of it in her words. "Hungry?" she asked, her tone light. "Yeah." I managed, my throat dry. She slid a plate toward me at the table. Toast, scrambled eggs, fruit arranged neatly. It was such a normal gesture, so ordinary that for a moment I almost convinced myself that everything was fine. We ate in quiet, speaking only of safe things: the weather, my mom's trip, a new neighbor who had just moved in. But every silence between words felt alive, carrying the weight of what we weren't saying. I noticed the little things: the way her hand lingered on the handle of the kettle, the fraction of a second too long before she laughed at something I said, the way she avoided brushing my arm when she passed the jam. Anyone else would have missed it, but I couldn't. Later that afternoon, I helped her carry laundry baskets back upstairs. The clothes were warm from the dryer, the scent of fabric softener still clinging to them. She thanked me as though it were nothing, but when her hand brushed mine on the edge of the basket, I felt the echo of the night before. It was brief, cautious, almost accidental, yet unmistakable. By evening she was gone, leaving only the faint trace of her perfume in the air and the memory of the door clicking shut. The house settled back into its rhythm. The hum of the refrigerator, the muted chatter of the TV I turned on for company, the ordinary emptiness of being alone again. But nothing about the silence felt the same anymore. I knew we would never talk about it. Not to my mom, not to each other. It would stay sealed inside that room with its humming machines and pale fluorescent light. And yet it would follow me. Whenever I heard the buzz of a dryer, whenever I smelled detergent in the air, whenever I thought of doors that close and locks that turn too easily. What remains after moments like that is not confession or explanation. It is the quiet aftermath, the weight of what stays unsaid, the knowledge that life can tilt in the space of a single heartbeat and leave you holding a silence that no words can carry. I lay awake that night, staring into the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of the house. Nothing was different, and yet everything was. The laundry room was just a laundry room again. But for me, it had become a place suspended outside of time, a space where silence had spoken louder than words ever could.
Bye bye.